भगवता नारायणेन स्वयं व्यासेन ग्रथितां पुराणमुनिना मध्ये महाभारतम् अद्वैतामृतवर्षिणीं भगवतीम् अष्टादशाध्यायिनीम् अम्ब त्वामनुसन्दधामि भगवद्गीते भवद्वेषिणीम् नमोऽस्तु ते व्यासविशालबुद्धे पुल्लारविन्दायतपत्रनेत्र येन त्वया भारततैलपूर्णः प्रज्वालितो ज्ञानमयप्रदीपः प्रपन्नपारिजाताय स्तोत्रवेत्रैकपाणये ज्ञानमुद्राय कृष्णाय गीतामृतदुहे नमः। सर्वोपनिषदो गावो दोग्धा गोपालनन्दनः पार्थो वत्सः सुधीर्भोक्ता दुग्धं गीतामृतं महत् वसुदेवसुतं देवं कंसचाणूरमर्दनं देवकी परमानन्दं कृष्णं वन्दे जगद्गुरुं तं ब्रह्मा वरुणेन्द्ररुद्रमरुतः स्तुन्वन्ति दिव्यैस्तवैः वेदैः साङ्गपदक्रमोपनिषदैः गायन्ति यं सामगाः ध्यानावस्थिततद्गतेन मनसा पश्यन्ति यं योगिनो यस्यान्तन्न विदुः सुरासुरगणाः देवाय तस्मै नमः।
Gurubhyo Namaha. We continue with chapter 3, Karma Yoga, and this is the essence of verses 31 to 33. The translation and commentary by Maharishi Ji. Yeme matam idam nityam anutishtanti manavaha shraddhavantah अनुसूयांतः मुच्यन्ते ते अपि कर्मभिः ये तु एतत् अभ्यसूयांतः न अनुतिष्ठन्ति मे मतं सर्वज्ञानविमूढान् तान् विद्धि नष्टान् अचेतसः सदृशं चेष्टते स्वस्त्या प्रकृति ज्ञानवान् अपि प्रकृतिं यान्ति भूतानि निग्रह किं करिष्यति. Now here is the English translation. Bhagavan says, those men who are possessed of faith, who do not find fault and always follow this teaching of mine, they too are liberated from action. Again, those men who are possessed of faith, who do not find fault and always follow this teaching of mine, they too are liberated from action. Next verse. But those who find fault and do not follow my teachings, know them to be deluded about all knowledge, doomed and senseless. Again, but those who find fault and do not follow my teaching, know them to be deluded about all knowledge, doomed and senseless. Creatures follow their own nature. Even the enlightened man acts according to his own nature. What can restraint accomplish? Again, creatures follow their own nature. Even the enlightened man acts according to his own nature. What can restraint accomplish? Now let us just review the last verse, verse number 30, where we left off. Surrendering all actions to me by maintaining your consciousness in the self, freed from longing and the sense of mind, fight delivered from the fever of delusion. So here Bhagavan is asking Arjuna to surrender all his actions to him, and he is saying it is not a fanciful thought or a mood of surrender, and actually it is the truth of one's life in activity. And this surrender comprehends all spheres of one's existence, physical, mental and spiritual. So it includes the mind and the intellect. And so here Bhagavan is explaining how the surrendering of all actions come to him. So he is telling Arjuna, you maintain the self-consciousness while performing action, and maintaining the transcendental self-consciousness along with activity in the waking state of consciousness requires coexistence of two states of consciousness. That means the waking and the self-consciousness. The ability of man's nervous system, which is the physical machinery through which consciousness expresses itself, has to be developed to express the two states simultaneously. Again, these two states are the waking state and then the self-consciousness. And this is brought about by regularly interrupting the constant activity of the waking state of consciousness with periods of silence in transcendental consciousness. Now, when one continues this practice, then the nervous system is permanently conditioned to maintain these two states together, and then the consciousness remains always centered in the self. So Bhagavan says, this centering of consciousness in the self, that means always being established in the self, is the way of surrendering all actions to me. So here in verse 31, now Bhagavan is further saying, those men who are possessed of faith, who do not find fault and always follow this teaching, they too are liberated from action. So in the previous verses, Bhagavan's teaching has been directed to Arjuna himself. But now, in this present verse, Bhagavan is extending his teaching to all men at all times. Now let us see what does he mean by saying possessed of faith. What Bhagavan means here is that faith should be unwavering and it is permanent. When a man has become fixed in faith, then he is freed from doubt and therefore ceases to find fault. Again, when a man is fixed in faith, then he is freed from doubt and therefore does not find fault. And this finding fault is finding fault in the other. Bhagavan is further saying, not finding fault and not speaking ill of others is counted an essential prerequisite to the realization of God and freedom from bondage. So again, Bhagavan is saying, do not speak ill of others, and this is a prerequisite for the realization of God and freedom from bondage. Now, when a man speaks ill of others, then he partakes of the sins of those of whom he speaks. Such a man thus draws more and more bad influence to himself, that is, he falls deeper into impurity. So again, understand that when someone speaks ill of others, then he partakes the sins of those peoples about whom he is speaking. And so naturally such a man draws more and more bad influence to himself, because he is taking on the sins of others, and he is creating more and more impurity within himself. So what the Lord is meaning is, those who are devoted and who feel full in themselves do not find fault with me or my teaching, and they are released from bondage. So here Bhagavan is saying, don't speak ill of others, don't find fault with others, but he is also saying, don't find fault with me, Bhagavan, or my teaching, which is the Bhagavad Gita. And then such people who do not find the fault in Bhagavan or his teaching or others is released from bondage. The most important thing here is, all the benefits of the teaching are gained only when one begins to practice it. The teaching of the Lord in the previous 3 verses is so complete that its practice can result in nothing less than the fulfillment of life. Now here Bhagavan is offering more hope for each individual. He is saying, it may be that one is not able to grasp the scope and significance of the teaching intellectually. But then when one practices it faithfully, even without understanding it, they too are liberated from action. They too realize the eternal contentment in bliss consciousness, which establishes the self as separate from activity and thereby brings fulfillment in God consciousness. Again, try to understand this, that Bhagavan is saying that even if one is not able to grasp the entire scope of his teaching intellectually, but if they can just practice it faithfully, that means practicing the transcendental meditation and practicing whatever Bhagavan is saying, don't speak ill of others, etc. If you just practice it with complete faith, even without understanding, then you can be liberated from action. And one can realize the eternal contentment in bliss consciousness, which establishes the self as separate from activity and thereby brings fulfillment in God consciousness. Bhagavan continues, but those who find fault and do not follow my teaching know them to be deluded about all knowledge, and they are doomed and senseless. So here when Bhagavan says, those who find fault do so because first of all they fail to understand, and then they begin to misunderstand. Not only do they fail to understand, but they begin to misunderstand. And when Bhagavan says, they do not follow my teaching, means that they do not understand it and do not put it into practice. They do not investigate the nature of the three gunas or the reality which lies beyond. So again, they find fault by failing to understand, and not only that, they start misunderstanding. And then on the top of it, they do not put it into practice. They not only do not understand, but do not also put it into practice. And then they do not investigate their gunas, the nature of their gunas. And they do not try to investigate also the reality of what is beyond the three gunas, which is the self. Now next, when Bhagavan says, deluded about all knowledge, and this means confused about the knowledge of relative existence and about the nature of the absolute reality. Further, when Bhagavan says deluded about all knowledge, now all knowledge here means many things. It includes the knowledge about the division of the gunas and their actions. It includes the knowledge about the self as separate from the field of action. And it includes the knowledge about the great Lord of all creation presiding over the absolute field of the self or being, and also over the relative field of the gunas. And also it includes the knowledge about the activity of the Lord itself. Bhagavan uses the word doomed. And what does he mean by this? That means the purpose of their life is lost. They cannot find worldly fulfillment, and they are lost to the divine. They fail to live bliss consciousness, and so remain in suffering. And so they are doomed. Now Bhagavan also uses this word that they are senseless, which means without proper values in life and devoid of pure consciousness, one becomes senseless. They have not attained the state of being. They have not experienced the self as separate from activity. Their self is involved in activity, and it is not in its own nature. For this reason, Bhagavan says they are senseless, as if without life, without consciousness. So here is the complete description of what Bhagavan is saying by saying, but those who find fault and do not follow my teaching, know them to be deluded about all knowledge, doomed and senseless. So here in this verse, Bhagavan declares that realization of the state of all knowledge is the only way to salvation and success in life. There is no other way. Bhagavan continues, creatures follow their own nature. Even the enlightened man acts according to his own nature. What can restraint accomplish? This is a very important verse to understand the truth about the freedom from bondage. Now, having said in the previous verse Again, now having said in the previous verse, know them to be deluded about all knowledge, Bhagavan in this verse gives the clue to all knowledge in order to be liberated from action. This verse brings out the truth that freedom from bondage is gained in a natural manner. Again, the freedom from bondage is gained in a natural manner, and Bhagavan denies the validity of control on the path of enlightenment. He means to introduce a natural way of life for fulfillment. In the field of activity, it is not desirable to create stress and strain by attempting control either from within or from without. So Bhagavan is saying, let everyone proceed naturally, complementing the state of transcendental consciousness gained during meditation with the activity of daily routine, and so be sure to win fulfillment. Now, looking at this natural way of life for fulfillment and enlightenment, here the natural tendency of the mind is towards greater happiness. It will inevitably find contentment in the supreme happiness, which is the transcendental bliss consciousness. And then it will rise above attachment, which is the basis of bondage. So here Bhagavan is saying, restraint is not needed, and actually he is condemning restraint, and he advises Arjuna to take things easily and not strain even to follow the teaching. Restraint is unnatural and cannot bring about that natural state of life where the self stands by itself in the state of non-attachment, uninvolved with activity. And now let us see why it is not necessary to use restraint. Again, restraint is unnatural and it will not bring about the natural state of life where the self stands by itself in the state of non-attachment. Here Bhagavan is emphasizing that it is only necessary to raise the level of one's consciousness by the experience of being. It is only necessary to raise the level of one's consciousness by the experience of being, and it is only necessary to become enlightened. Any restraint and all restraint offered to activity does not accomplish the goal, because the natural seat of bondage does not lie with the mind or the senses, which alone could be influenced by restraint. So again here, the restraint can be applied only to the mind and the senses, and the natural seat of bondage does not lie with the mind or the senses. So this attachment, the seat of bondage, does not lie within. It is located outside in the region of the object of experience. Because this attachment is located outside in the region of the object of experience, therefore non-attachment cannot be gained by restraining the mind or senses or keeping them away from activity. Again, keeping them away from activity, keeping the mind and the senses away from activity, does not create a state of non-attachment. And non-attachment cannot be gained by non-activity either, or any kind of restraint. It can only be gained by realizing the self and by realizing its separateness from activity. There is no other way. Bhagavan is saying there is no other way, because creatures must follow their own nature. They must be engaged in activity according to their own level of consciousness, and therefore enlightenment, if it is to be of universal application, must be possible irrespective of the kind of activity in which one is engaged. And so, the state of enlightenment, the state of knowledge, cannot be gained through restraint, which discriminates between different kinds of activity. It must be on the level of absolute being, on the level of realization of the self, and completely regardless of the activity that a man undertakes according to his own nature. So again, one has to be engaged in activity according to their level of consciousness, and one must be on the level of absolute being, on the level of realization of the self. And then one must realize the separateness from activity. So here Bhagavan is saying very emphatically, there is no other way. The next verse throws more light on this, and we will continue. So here is the essence of the verses 31 to 33, chapter 3, Karma Yoga, the translation and commentary by Maharshi Ji. Now I will add a few words. In the Vedas, this natural dharma has been described in great detail. And Bhagavan continuously repeats saying, stick to your own dharma, stay within your own dharma. Even till about 50 to 100 years ago, in this Vedic culture, there were many Gurukuls, and the children at the age of 7 or 8 would be taken to these Gurukuls, and here their learning started at the feet of the Guru. And the Guru taught the child based on his capabilities or abilities, the aptitudes. If one had the aptitude to learn scriptures, he was drawn to gaining this pure knowledge and was scholarly, then he was referred to as Brahmana, and he became a Brahmana. If the child was bold and courageous and expressed a lot of strength and stamina, then he was trained in martial arts and he became a Kshatriya, meaning the warrior. So based on these varnas, then these became the natural abilities, and these were not by birth. These were how one is born with these aptitudes and capabilities and possibilities. So this is how, based on the 4 varnas, the children were given the opportunities to grow naturally and to be trained accordingly. And this is the natural dharma, the Prakriti dharma. So when these children were taught in the Gurukuls, and when they became youth, then they entered the world fully prepared to face its challenges. Lack of this transcendental knowledge and not gaining the higher states of consciousness and not gaining the full potential and understanding all their possibilities. When one enters this world, then they do not have the mastery of living in this world and how to gain the most in the life, and this causes all kinds of stress and strain in life. In many ways, this Gurukul life has brought great stability to the youth, gave them the full development and the capabilities and the potential. So in the absence of the Gurukuls, it is important that the children gain this knowledge from the beginning. Parents and the teachers encourage them to meditate regularly and not be so stressed and strained, and experience the bliss within themselves and look at their aptitudes and possibilities and help them develop naturally without stress and strain. And this is why Maharshi Ji wanted the TM to be taught in the schools, in all the schools, and introduce the yogic flying and also teach the universal knowledge of the Vedic science as a period to all the students. Another important aspect to understand is that everyone is born with these tendencies which are inherent and innate nature, and this is based on their karma and the vasana. And these vasanas are expressed in the form of physical actions, emotional feelings, and intellectual ideas. Any external restraints cannot and will not change their basic nature and how they express themselves. These vasanas have to take their own course and manifest themselves in spite of acquiring knowledge. And so here Maharshi Ji is saying, all you have to do is rise the consciousness. Rise in consciousness and do the work naturally and allow the transformation to come from within. Then these impressions of this karma, the samskaras and the vasanas will diminish, and new impressions and patterns are not being formed. And this is how one can exhaust these vasanas and exhaust the present karma, past and present karma. Again, it is important to understand no restraint or restriction will change the pattern of the vasanas, and they continue their course even while acquiring the knowledge. It is only by raising the consciousness that everything starts changing. So it is important, just be aware that whatever one is expressing, it is the effect of these impressions and patterns of the past, which we call as karma or the vasana or the samskaras, but these will change. So one should have faith and continuously be focused in gaining this intellectual knowledge as well as the experiential knowledge with the practice of transcendental meditation. Here again, Shraddha includes the capacity of the intellect to reflect upon the teachings. Shraddha also involves understanding and assimilating this knowledge, and Shraddha also means ability to pursue this knowledge, both intellectual and experiential, until one experiences the self. And it also means one follows this path and one continues to gain this knowledge both experientially and intellectually, until it brings the transformation in one's personality and one gains this higher knowledge. So here in conclusion, it is important to understand that one should have the faith, the Shraddha. Shraddha means a lot more, and we have already talked about it. And let the progression come naturally and without any restraint. And let all the focus be on raising the consciousness. I will end here. Jai Gurudev, Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu.
ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मीलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। गीतामाहात्म्यम्